jungle mains have historically been labeled as toxic, and I think actually it's because of just the nature of the role itself and how much responsibility that it can theoretically have. And this kind of sets up fundamental building blocks also for professional players as well that happen to go, into the LCS or the LEC or whatnot. And it's kind of like that Bane quote where he's like, "You were merely adopted by the darkness. I was born in it, molded by it." Like that's exactly what fucking junglers are. They were born in the toxic nature, right? And I think it's because of where they actually came from, which is junglers always being blamed for everything wrong in the game, right? Like why someone is losing a lane, or the other jungler is ganking, so why aren't you ganking for me? Because I keep dying to all these ganks, or all my jungler does is farm, and jungle isn't getting the Rift Heralds or the dragons or whatever. So it's no fucking wonder that these jungle mains just end up full muting and just playing their game, or just super raging in solo queue and fucking going on, keyboard warrior rants and shit. And so I think this kind of nature just puts up a fundamental building block, which kind of sets up junglers who go into professional play at a backward start, I guess, in terms of just social interaction with their team, how they're able to accept feedback or even give feedback, right? Because it's essentially set up in solo queue, to where it's a 1v4 v1v4, right? So the jungler is just by themselves and they're just trying to do whatever they can do, and then it's all the laners, and then it's all the laners on the other side, and then the jungler doing whatever the fuck he wants in solo queue, right? So it then needs to change into this 5v5 dynamic, and I think a lot of junglers actually have a really big problem adapting to that, both in playstyle and also in the social aspect. I had an interview once with Media, speaking of junglers that are viewed as toxic. He once said in an interview with me that junglers will always be somewhat misaligned with laners, because there's this misconception that essentially the jungle on their team isn't there enough for them, right? They can only divide their attention so much between all the lanes. But when they think about the enemy jungler and the enemy jungle pressure, that always exists, because the enemy jungler could be there theoretically at any time and at any place, right? So the pressure is constantly on laners, but in reality, it really isn't, right? The jungler is at a specific point on the map at all given times. It's just you don't know where he is. And I think this was a really brilliant point, because it creates this facade that your allied jungler basically can never do as good as the enemy jungler, because of this inherent like omnipresence that the enemy jungler has. And so that's also probably why a lot of junglers within the LCS do very good if they can then end up tracking the enemy jungler, because then everybody knows where he is, or if the jungler kind of has a pretty good indication of knowing where the enemy jungler is, he'll tell his lanes, hey, you have to play safe here, because the jungler is most likely going to be coming to your lane. And that also was a point that Meteos had said, which was that then that is like the bearer of bad news, that then that person has to play safe. So as you can see, jungle is quite an assertive role in a sense, right? Because you have to take ownership of the early game, and theoretically, at least within professional play more so than anything, you are the catalyst for things to happen, right? You are the snowball mechanic, the big bang, as it were, right? No things go out of order until you start hitting other, ping pong balls in that essence. So that's the role of a jungler within pro play. But within solo queue play, sometimes and most times it is to repair lanes, right? And there's this old adage, right? That's never gank a losing lane. This was a very old school adage. I don't think a lot of people really talk about this anymore, or even necessarily have this concept in their minds quite as frequently, but it goes on the basis of, well, if someone is 0-2, I can't really help that lane because then I might be double killed, or it is also because, well, that person just sucks. So why would I help them? Because, well, if they suck and they lost the lane by themselves, how are they going to carry the entire game, right? They clearly have already shown that they suck. So why would I give resources over to them when I could give it to another lane, and hopefully that lane will snowball because they actually know how to play the game, right? And so jungle itself is always going through these different types of thought processes of how to actually snowball the game and how to win the game. And that's going to put one lane more in favor than another lane just by the inherent nature of jungle itself. So you're going to have two lanes that get less pressure from you than, one lane itself. And so you're always going to be viewed as the bad guy from two other sources on the map itself. So I think that's largely why the role gets a bad rap in and of itself. And, going back to Meteos, he had another great quote that I did with him in an interview way back. I want to say it was 2019, which was that with every action you do as a jungler, it's going to help one person out on the map but hurt another, right? Because the other person has to end up playing safe, or dealing with less resources, maybe having to put out a little bit more guesswork because they don't know if the jungler is going to be there or not, or it is a more likelihood that the jungler will be there because your jungler is, ganking top side or ganking bot side or whatnot. So the obvious counterplay would be to gank the other side of the map, which is quite common that we see in the LCS. So it seems as though jungle is just a divisive role in and of itself, even when you get to the LCS era. And then you were already set up fundamentally because within solo queue, as we all know, there is several inflated egos, people saying that the only reason why they lost was because their jungler didn't gank, or a lack of responsibility is also largely missing in solo queue, right? People being held back by their teammates and that they don't belong in a particular rank or whatnot. And so it seems as though junglers often start at a back foot when transitioning into pro play. And I think that's inherently why we see jungle as kind of this toxic role, and why professional players view jungle as like this opposing role, even in their own team. And it just kind of sucks that they're set back with this. But I think it's a nature that we at least have to acknowledge, and then kind of at least put more attention into. If you're a team itself, put more attention into maybe trying to understand and then develop a jungler to fit into the professional scene a little bit more attention than any of the other roles, in that sense of socializing them and integrating them into a professional setting.